a lot of people have this kind of interpretation of DevSecOps, which is a little bit incorrect. A lot of people have kind of been marketed DevSecOps as like a tool, as some sort
Mm,
of technology that just, fixes cloud migrations and make everything a secure pipeline.
perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But really people kind of need to kind of take a step back, like really understand that, DevSecOps is a methodology, right? It's a way of doing things. It's a standardized set of procedures and security measures, that you kind of want to implement into your SDLC.
Welcome to the Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host and AppSec enthusiast and growth manager at Escape, an API discovery and security platform. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Michael Tayo to the show. As the information security lead at EDX Markets, Michael advises C-suite leaders and drives strategies to protect critical infrastructure and institutional crypto markets. With prior roles at banks and Tempus AI, Michael brings a wealth of experience in cloud security and risk management. He's also the founder of CyberShield, a platform empowering security professionals with training and resources, and Ghetto Flower, a creative agency uplifting underrepresented talent. In this episode, Michael and I explore the difference in security testing for on-premise and cloud environments, the importance of asset visibility and risk assessment for hybrid cloud migration, and how DevSecOps practices thrive with leadership buy-in and team collaboration. Plus, we discuss how to use security data to tell compelling stories and provide meaningful insights to stakeholders. Dive right in!
Hi, Michael. I'm super excited to have you as a guest on the Elephant and AppSec podcast. Thanks a lot for finding your time and joining me. And I'm super curious to learn more about your experience, more about cloud security as well, which is kind of the core of your experience as well. And just super excited also because 1 month ago I spent almost like several weeks in London, so I talked with a lot of people from financial sector.
Yeah.
Because in London it's actually like any AppSec person I met, they worked either like in fintech or in a big bank like Capital One. So it was actually like I did not expect so much just concentration of people, and like actually like I could see some common trends among them. People like a lot of people are having a problem with, for example, auto prioritizing vulnerabilities and building their internal ISPM tools, actually creating SBOMs, some of them managing API discovery as well. Like I literally had conversation yesterday about it, and also having a kind of migrating to hybrid cloud environments as well within the recent years and kind of managing it cross country. And I think the latter, it's something you've been involved in personally as well, and kind of building on it and having this huge experience on like migrating to a hybrid cloud, which is like not easy to manage because you have on-prem on one side, then you have cloud environment on another. And I think Capital One like had the same challenge, especially like they had a lot of security challenges because of the breaches as well within the past year, but that's why they can also double down on that. Is it kind of the same trends that you're seeing on your side, or do you see anything else as well?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a trend now in the financial services. It's also a similar trend in, manufacturing as well, and supply chain um pillars as well. So yeah, no, really, you hit it on the head, right? A lot of these large enterprise organizations, they need more visibility. They need more insight into that third party risk, that software supply chain. It's really big nowadays. And obviously a couple years ago where Log4j, Log4Shell, that definitely ruffled a lot of feathers.
Mm,
These large enterprises who were kind of going through or in those initial phases of a migration to the cloud or some sort of hybrid model realized that, hey, throughout this process, we really don't have our ducks in a row in terms
mm,
of the visibility into our software and application stack. And yeah, it's been really, really a heavy priority for a lot of those large companies, especially financial services. They're dealing with tons of data, they're dealing with tons of regulations and compliance standards that they have to abide by. And so, having controls in place that improve that visibility, improve that detection is definitely on the forefront now that, like you mentioned, the attack surface is just grown
Yeah.
exponentially, right? Where we're now migrating from a private on-premise data centers to, the the big public
Yeah.
cloud networks, that have data centers across the world. So now that you have such a larger attack surface and, really just a sprawl of identity and resources across the world, you really need to keep that sort of inventory for, software and application tech stack details.
Like you mentioned also like Log4Shell, do you think it's quite often something that I hear that the breaches or kind of the problems that you experience, on the market level, they act as a catalyst for actually fixing the issues in the company? Do you think it is actually the case, or sometimes it depends also on the company culture?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, but a lot of the times when you see those headlines of breaches or, zero-day exploits and, vulnerabilities, that's usually what kicks people into gear. And it hurts me to say it, but no one cares about security until it's time to care about security. So, it's something that I always try to say, an advocate of, being proactive, right? How do you get ahead of this stuff? And obviously, we don't live in a perfect world. No one can predict the future, but implementing methodologies, patterns, practices that can at least help you get become more resilient and help you become more proactive in those cases where incidents kind of have a detrimental effect.
How can you be more proactive, for example, when you are migrating to like a hybrid cloud environment or have hybrid cloud environment in place and never actually thought about security?
Yeah. I think I kind of hinted at it at the beginning, right? The biggest thing in security is visibility. You need to have visibility into essentially your inventory. Everything
Yeah.
that you are trying to protect or trying to defend or essentially trying to, not let the bad guys into, you need to have an inventory of that, whether that's, software, whether that's employees, whether that's hardware, whatever it is may be, whatever matters to your business, that data that you are trying to protect, you need to have an inventory of it. Because without having that inventory, that source of truth, that system of record that you are 100% confident in, you really don't know what it is that you're trying to protect. And if you don't know what you don't know, a breach like Log4j could, you know, be super detrimental. So first thing I always say is like having that asset visibility. And when I say assets, I'm not just speaking about, mobile devices or laptops or endpoints. I'm talking about every single identity possible. So service accounts, endpoints, wireless access points, users, employees, and contractors, right? It all kind of funnels up into what an identity is from a cybersecurity lens. But I think really having that inventory is just kind of that first step that all companies need to kind of understand is what is it that we're trying to protect once this migration, successfully takes place? What does success look like from an inventory perspective?
Who should be responsible for actually building this inventory? Because it's someone has to,
Yeah.
get started.
Yeah, and that's really tough, and that's where kind of bureaucracy and a corporate culture and kind of that politics comes to play. But ultimately, I would say whoever kind of is leading the transformation from an information perspective, so usually like a CIO or a CTO, someone that has a breadth of knowledge in the actual landscape of the infrastructure and resources behind that company. I would say those would typically be the first people that would say, hey, here's what we have today. Obviously, they will most likely kind of inform and consult with the security folks, kind of maybe employ some technology to help them get additional visibility. But ultimately, I'd say it's kind of a business driver from the technology standpoint.
Okay.
But, that's definitely debatable, depending on the
Okay.
company. So.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you might have people also like bottom up. They just I don't know, read an exciting article or actually listen to a podcast,
Yeah.
you never know. And they thought, yeah, okay, maybe I should come to someone within my organization and actually try to pitch, let's say, more initiatives around cloud security as well, get visibility on point. They might know that they don't monitor everything, right? But like once you've actually built this inventory of everything, what would be the next step?
Yeah, I would say from like a migration standpoint, once you kind of have that inventory, it's really determining like the risk level and appropriated risk that you are willing to take from an attack perspective. Do you care about it? Does it have any sort of sensitive data relevant to your company? Does it process? Is it processing transactions? Is this, customer facing? Will this, if this was potentially to be impacted, would this affect customers? Would this affect the bottom line? So that's where you kind of have to start doing those sort of risk calculations. They always say,
Yeah.
impact versus, probability. So really from a business perspective, and this is where you'll probably have to leverage some of the GRC focus or the governance, compliance, and risk focus people can help you really quantify, the risk behind each of these software stacks. So if you run the inventory and you notice that, I don't know, these are arbitrary numbers, right? Let's just say a large percentage of your web servers are maybe vulnerable. They're running on virtual machines that are currently in, VMware. If you're going to migrate them to AWS, let's just say, you notice that a lot of them are vulnerable. They could be some old, outdated version of Apache, let's just say. You then, the risk folks, you go to them and say, hey, do we want to migrate these to vulnerable, or do we want to take care of it now and then plan the migration afterwards? And that would be a kind of conversation between multiple teams, the technical team, the security team, the risk teams. But ultimately, you would have to create a plan to determine, are you going to fix these now? Are you going to fix them once they're migrated? Are you going to implement guardrails that even prevent those applications from being migrated? And these, I make it sound easy, but these are the type of projects that obviously take years to do. This is just one specific application, but obviously large enterprises have thousands of applications and workflows and identities. So it's definitely something that kind of takes long. You got to think long term, and you got to really build that circle of influence to try to drive those type of projects.
Yeah, but I think like the building of the circle of influence is actually super hard, and it takes time. It takes actually time. You can't just start from the onboarding. Go to multiple team leaders and ask, "Hey, I want to implement that because I saw it in my previous company."
Yeah.
Immediately get a buy-in. It takes time, even like to build your personal brand within the company, kind of. So it takes, like, what advice actually would you give to someone on that, like how to get this, how to actually create this influence without within the company for maybe people respecting you?
Yeah, totally. And that's tough, especially I see it a lot in cybersecurity, and especially now with a lot of new talent coming into the industry and trying to break through and bring through a lot of change. I would always say, you kind of want to lead by example. And when I say that, um, show proof that, the ideas that you have, the projects that you want to implement, showcase the value to people, in your team and then outside of your team. Every opportunity you have to maybe shadow a project or, even just sit in on a meeting or take notes for one of your higher ups, use that as an opportunity to maybe drop some gems in terms of, security ideas, right? So maybe you're sitting in on a call with maybe an IT team who's, I don't know, they're helping you deploy an update to a router, let's just say. Maybe that security engineer or that security lead who wants to implement maybe an automated process around security patching, they could, maybe chime in on that meeting and potentially, set up a lunch and learn about maybe some new automation capabilities that they read about in a newsletter or read about in a podcast. Not necessarily trying to build Rome in one day, but kind of dropping those gems, those security gems here and there, and giving people an opportunity to ask questions and dive deeper. I think something that kind of sets security people apart is that drive and that grit to continuously learn and kind of dig deeper into subjects. And so once you've like found the people who are interested in those type of things, kind of use that as leverage and kind of like breed an army of people who have your support and you have their support to drive these security initiatives forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like the continuous learning, it's super important. Like we have with my team lunch and learn cybersecurity
Yeah,
actually. So we do have lunch and
yeah,
learn. So kind of it was one of my ideas to try to bring more knowledge to people who come from a business background. Let's say about different topic of the cybersecurity. So for example, we had one lunch and learn about. Like pen testing. So what is black box? What is gray box? Like what is white box? I kind of try to explain to
yeah,
them from a very simple perspective. At least like what it means, and just like everyone at least progresses in their knowledge. So it's been super interesting. And you kind of mentioned about automation. So automating everything, I think, has become for a lot of people, a lot of departments, kind of a necessity in a sense, especially with the release of AI, and like everything has to be faster and quicker. And for developers, also they have to deliver code much
yeah,
faster, and that's where like DevSecOps practices, come in. So they kind of establish, a set of security measures, how to integrate them within a CLDLC. And it can be applied, all across all the cloud environments. Like it takes, though, I think it's certain, you need to achieve certain level of maturity in a sense to start implementing that, right? So
yeah.
how hard it is what level of maturity do you have to achieve, and how hard it is to actually kind of develop those standards in a like cloud, in a hybrid cloud setup?
Yeah, yeah, it's tough. It's tough, because it's, with DevSecOps, right? A lot of people have this kind of interpretation of DevSecOps, which is a little bit incorrect. A lot of people are kind of been marketed DevSecOps as like a tool, as some sort
Mm,
of like technology that just, fixes cloud migrations and make everything a secure pipeline.
perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but really, people kind of need to kind of take a step back and like really understand that DevSecOps is a methodology, right? It's a way of doing things. It's a standardized set of procedures and security measures, that you kind of want to implement into your SDLC. To answer your question though, the maturity level is going to be different wherever you are, right? If you're a company, a large enterprise that has never done anything in the cloud or has never done anything in an automated fashion, um, you're gonna have, there's gonna be a huge learning curve. But if you're a tech startup who was born in the cloud and have the best engineers in the world, you can get stood up with DevSecOps in an afternoon. It's really easy from that standpoint. So it all kind of just depends on the level of buy-in that you have from some senior leadership, and then even from a bottom-up approach, you have to have developers and engineers and security folks that actually like working like this, because DevSecOps is a style of doing security in the pipeline. It's a style of doing secure code development. If you have engineers who, they see this as slowing them down, or they maybe
Mm,
just are resistant to change, they're not going to be as bought in, and that could actually, you know, cause some sort of resentment. So I think the biggest thing and the level of maturity is just having people that understand the technology, understand the business value, and understand how this makes their life easier, and that looks different from every company. Financial services will may probably take a little bit longer just because of the traditional nature and antiquated nature of some of the processes within banking, whereas a
I don't
I don't
know,
know. Yeah, cloud.
crypto.
Yeah, exactly. A crypto
Whatever.
company or a cloud company or like a biotech firm,
Yeah.
they more be, well more equipped due to just the level of engineering and cloud nature that their work kind of entails from right from the get-go.
Mm,
Um, and it's
mm,
hard, right? I don't want to make it sound like it's easy. This requires learning, upskilling, training, buying, policies, procedures, and all of this takes time. All of this has to be developed. All of this has to be audited. All of this has to be signed off on. And then, you kind of have to also nurture those employees, nurture that talent to, not only just, set up DevSecOps and bring it in, but also maintain it, build a program that's sustainable in the long term.
yeah. And you also mentioned, like that developers can be resistant to change, like software engineers can be resistant to change, and it is true. So how would you overcome, people who are resistant?
Yeah, I think, I kind of touched on that a little bit, is like showcasing the value. Typically, and mainly in like DevSecOps, right? The biggest goal I'd say is to make it as seamless and scalable as possible, right? Ultimately, you want to deliver secure code so you can improve the customer experience, right? At a high level, that's the goal of DevSecOps. You want to push secure code so it makes your product better, so customers are more happy.
Okay.
You kind of have to like put that spin on it when you maybe talk to those individuals who may be a little resistant or giving a little bit of pushback. You kind of have to let them know that, hey, the reason why we're doing this is so you don't have to be bombarded with emails by security to go fix these vulnerabilities post production, which takes time out of our lives. Right now, we have to go submit change requests. Now we have to have cutover windows and blackout periods, and maybe you'll be working more on the weekend because now your app is failing more. And so
Okay.
you kind of have to like spin it to where it's like this process, this methodology, this new way of doing things in the long term will make our relationship improve and then make your life a lot easier in terms of not having to be bombarded by security alerts or security coming and knocking on your door with a list of stuff to go fix. With these new ways of doing things, you kind of foster that relationship and nurture that sort of openness and collaboration a little bit more. So I think that's a good way to kind of spin it to those people who may not be the most happiest about leveraging a new way of doing things, but just giving them that insight into how this kind of helps the company and how this kind of helps them on their day to day.
Yeah, so to show them that they get how they can be less annoyed in the future, kind
Exactly.
of. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
In a sense, I think sometimes also as we touched a bit in the beginning, like some kind of event also might help to speed up the process. It's just a bit more annoying because then it comes more top down and it backs like everyone and just more stressful. Like for example, since April we heard like all about like Snowflake related breaches, like in the industry, how for example someone could have access to like actual database through having a stolen credential, like implementing malware, so remember, and actually getting the credential that everyone, like a lot of their customers were actually impacted. And maybe it also, do you think like when you're selecting actually like a collaborator or partner in let's say storing data in data somewhere, or storing data in the cloud, or storing your applications in the cloud, how do you, for example, evaluate them from security standpoint to avoid that?
It's hard now because a lot of times when a company goes in to partner with another company, you kind of take what they say and go with it, right? Now obviously working at a large enterprise and kind of have to go through the whole procurement process, the third party risk management process, and you kind of have to sort of vet and validate that this company is who they say they are and you're comfortable doing business with them from a financial transaction partnership perspective. But from a technology perspective, you can only really just take what they say with it, and kind of just treat that as the truth. Obviously, a company can provide you with maybe SOC 2 compliance reports and audit findings, but ultimately, they're not going to let you have access to their AWS account or have access to their GCP account. And the same way, vice versa, depending on the relationship of that specific partner. I'd say the biggest thing that companies could do is really just kind of like understand and hope that the company is following best practices for that industry and for that pillar in which they operate in, and kind of look in the mirror as well and say, are we doing that? Are we doing the same thing that we expect of our partners? Because 9 times out of 10, you're probably not. So it's always
Probably
like,
not though.
people always want to point at the bad guy like, haha, they got breached, or haha, I'm glad it's them and not us. But when you turn around and look at your infrastructure, your environment, Like you start to see a lot of the red flags and say, oh wow, like that could have been us. What do we need to do so we're not the next breach, or we're not the next snowflake, or we're not the next MGM. Because 9 times out of 10, there's just some risk ready to be exposed and exploited in your organization.
Yeah, for sure. I think in the industry, just some industries are a bit luckier than others because they're at least less target of attackers. So that's what let's see here. From some companies that we're working, we know that we're going to be, say, we're in telecommunications, so we know we're going to be less target of an attackers. Even if you take a like 18 breach, still it happens. But like. Financial industry, they never say that. Like, I never heard someone in the finance saying that. So it's kind of other way around. So it's a bit more scary, but there is still a pressure. And I think there is another part of the pressure when you actually everything is now, as we talked about, like optimized for speed. Was there actually a situation in your experience when something was compromised for speed, or do you think maybe there should be situations where you should kind of compromise a little bit on security?
I can't share any stories specific to myself, but I think one that's kind of relevant is the CrowdStrike outage that caused Microsoft endpoints to be affected for quite some time. I think that's a good example of where speed ultimately trumped security.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
I've heard some people say that, oh, this isn't a cybersecurity incident, and it was a bug in some code. Well, I kind of argue that it is a cybersecurity incident because in cybersecurity you're taught about the CIA triad. You're talking about confidentiality, integrity, and in this case availability was the thing that was impacted. Therefore, I do see this as where essentially the whoever was an IT team, infrastructure team, or an application team. I don't really know the inner details of it, but they deployed some code, kind of like what I hinted at to, improve the customer experience is what they thought. That code ended up,
especially in the airports, it did not improve the customer experience.
Exactly, right. So they pushed this, what they thought was going to do wonders and improve their product. It did the complete opposite and caused an availability outage of Windows workstations. This is a great example of why things have to be kind of tested and why security is necessary. Not just security in the aspect of something was stolen or data was breached, but security in the aspect that safety was ultimately jeopardized. I heard that some people were affected in ambulance response, that some people were affected from fire departments couldn't contact or use any of the services. So ultimately, safety was impacted, and that's the goal of security, is to protect human safety. So it's like you kind of see this stuff happening, and especially because it was a large company like CrowdStrike, large company like Microsoft. I think this is a good lesson to be learned here, right? Is it worth it, right? Do we want to be forcing people to move so fast where they're kind of overlooking small things and potentially putting people at risk? Or we kind of live in this capitalistic society where it's like, hey, push the product, we'll deal with that later. But obviously in this use case it had some adverse effects. So it's interesting, and I think it's a balancing act for sure. And you mentioned it too, right? Some companies out there, they're not as big as CrowdStrike, they're not as big as Microsoft. They're pushing buggy products all the time, but it doesn't really matter because the impact is so small. But at scale, some of this stuff definitely matters.
Yeah, and I think that's why at scale, the size of the security team is also bigger because it just matters so much more. I think it's like one security person per 50 developers. At least that's what's usually the benchmark here, at least in the industry. I don't know if that's your case, but what, for example, do you feel like if we talk about hybrid environments on premise and like in the cloud, is the speed of something being and actually security testing different somehow between the two, or the approach is kind of the same? It's just where something is deployed different.
I'd say it's a little bit a mix of both. The approach to security is different, and the way resources are being deployed different. So obviously in a cloud environment, ideally in a perfect world, everything would be deployed via some sort of pipeline as infrastructure as code. And obviously the benefits of deploying in a more programmatic, declarative way is that you can actually implement policy as code and security as code ultimately. And so that's where kind of like always advocate for implementing DevSecOps into your security pipeline. So that's obviously the secret detection. So you're detecting any sort of secrets. You're doing the SaaS. You're doing the DAS. You're doing any sort of API security. You're doing any sort of infrastructure code scanning. All that type of stuff that would occur in the pipeline. You're kind of handling security on the front end of that deployment. Whereas, maybe in a traditional on-premise environment, you've already deployed the server. It's running, it's running Linux, it's running Apache, it's running MySQL, it's running Python, and that's already been deployed. It's done. No one can necessarily, in a scalable, seamless way, validate those the vulnerability of those aspects before it was deployed. And so you only have one choice, which is to evaluate it and assess it after the fact it's been deployed. So that's very drastically different to a DevSecOps pipeline where you're doing all of that scanning during the build stage, during the runtime, before anything's even been deployed to prod. So it's a little bit of both difference in how security is done, and then just a difference in how resources are being deployed at a scale.
Okay, and that's going to be a little bit like controversial question, but in the pipeline, do you find some security tool a bit useless?
I'd say every tool has its purpose. I think sometimes the data can be useless if not used in the right way.
Okay.
Because you could be doing all of the secret detection, DAS, SaaS, IC scanning, policy as code that you want, but if you're not doing anything with the data, then it all becomes obsolete. And so I think that's where some tools and procedures that are implemented into DevSecOps, it's like, there's this famous quote, I forgot who said it, but it's like, before you start collecting before you start collecting data, you have to know what you're going to do with it, because, it's similar to trash in that aspect, right? You collect trash because you're going to throw it out. But if you didn't throw it out, you just be collecting trash. You ask yourself, well, why am I collecting trash? So you don't want to be collecting data that you won't use, essentially.
Yeah, and what type of data do you think is actually important, and what the type of data is potentially useless?
Yeah, I think data there's two types of data, and one of my previous mentors and previous CISOs kind of told me this. He was like, Michael, I need you to create some dashboards, but I need you to create, two different types of dashboards, that have this reporting data. He's like, I want you to create one that has data that tells me a story. So it tells me, here's where we were, here's where we are now today. It kind of tells me a story. And then I want you to give me one that's more signal based. And by signal based, he means it's kind of like binary. It's either green or red. It means something good or something bad. So there's two types of data and reports. And so when it comes to security data, I think the data has to be either storytelling data or that binary data that tells me if something's good or bad. I don't really care about, maybe number of vulnerabilities at scale, because that doesn't tell me how good my security program is. It just tells me how good I am at detecting vulnerabilities. But if you were to give me, data regarding what is our level of compliance for vulnerability scanning, i.e., what percentage of the environment are we in compliance with vulnerability scanning, that's either going to be a red or green. It's going to tell us whether we're below that threshold, above that threshold. So that's just an example of where, you don't just want to start collecting data just to collect it, but you also want to make sure that data tells a story And then also, as you present that data, it signals.
It's very, totally agree with you. I think that's I think in that case, it's super important because especially now we're kind of overwhelmed with the amount of data that just exists somewhere, everywhere. I mean, they say that data is now new oil as well,
Yeah.
because of like especially in security in world for a reason, but and for everyone because of Facebook as well, how your data is used to monetize, the larger corporations, like everything, but also for organizations, just so much of it, and actually prioritize and kind of see what's impact for business, what story it tells. I know it is super important, and it's not that easy to actually understand what is important. And I think something. What do you think about like mean time to fix something? Because that's kind of a metric I heard about a lot, because it helps to evaluate kind of on one side the impact of a security champion programs, for example, in organizations, if they actually building good relationships with developer. On another side, actually how clear are we communicating and prioritizing our vulnerabilities. Do you think it's one of the is it still relevant? Is it one of like really significant metrics to look at, or do you
Yeah.
not
So
sure?
it all depends on the context, right? Because mean time to fix isn't something that I would tell maybe a board of directors. It isn't something I would even probably tell a CISO. It's something I would probably tell a vulnerability management leader or one management lead, or maybe even like an application team. So it all kind of depends on the audience and the context, right? I think, mean time to fix, basically, as it kind of reads, it's telling you the average time to remediate or fix a vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
The board doesn't really care how fast we're fixing vulnerabilities. They want to know, are we in risk? So how does that look from like, mean time to fix is more of like a tactical metric, but you also have to look, how does that translate into a strategic metric and then into a, organizational metric. So there's different metrics that tell a different story, and the context and the audience of those metrics are very key, because that kind of helps where you're at and who you're kind of talking to, and where this data kind of fits into what they care about. So yeah, to answer your question, I think it's a good metric. It's a relevant metric. It's a good way to measure. But also something to keep in mind is like, who would be the audience of that metric? Mean time fix. Yeah, I think it'll be great, to your point, to kind of identify who those security champions are, who are fixing vulnerabilities the fastest. But that doesn't, equate to any sort of security
A risk.
posture. Yeah, or
Okay.
risk, essentially. Yeah.
Okay. For example, for how would you translate it potentially into risk, or what metrics would you then communicate to, let's say, CISO?
Yeah. So good question, right? So mean time to fix, average time to fix a vulnerability. What we could then use that metric, we could then say something like, okay, out of the vulnerabilities that were fixed, a small percentage of them was maybe critical or very high. Using now that we have that metrics, kind of a subset of that metric, we can now time track it over time. So we could say, last quarter, this is where we're at. This quarter, this is where we're at. And we can say that due to, I don't know, implementing a new process, maybe, due to implementing DevSecOps,
Yeah. Well,
or
that
whatever.
helps to justify the kind
Yeah,
of showcase. Yeah,
exactly.
it is
And then,
important
yeah,
to
so we could
communicate.
start to kind of paint that data to, some of the projects, some of the initiatives, and then ultimately too, right, kind of want to equate that to like dollars potentially, or that actual sort of something that like, the board or CISO would care about, because they're being directed to kind of control the budget and reduce risk. So you kind of have to tell that story with based on this new process or project or technology that we implemented, meantime fix has been reduced by this amount. We've been able to successfully bring down the average number of vulnerabilities, which potentially is reducing our risk posture by this dollar amount. So kind of just want to essentially tell a story about the ROI from that specific metric.
Okay, how would you calculate that dollar amount? Because sometimes it's not really evident to link it. Like, for example, I said, take an average cost of data breach, the probability that it might happen, how it is reflects in your financial, how it reflects in your sector. I would say potential costs of non-compliance that are related to that, right? What other different points would you include in
Yeah.
that dollar?
Yeah, I think those are good ones. Average cost of data points, average cost of reach. For this specific example, right, mean time to fix, you also want to look at the resources involved in doing that as well. So you're paying an engineer or an analyst to go fix something. What is their hourly rate? How many hours a week are they spending fixing vulnerabilities? And then you can quantify their hourly wage by the amount of time spent over a month, over a year. And, as you get that data in and the time reduces on that specific task for remediating vulnerabilities, you can sort of promote that as potential cost savings and, reducing the financial burden of remediating risk, which ultimately tells the story of an increased return on investment for implementing security.
Okay, very clear. That's I hope someone it's gonna be. I think it's gonna be super helpful for the listeners to actually have that practical advice because sometimes, especially if you're just starting, you don't really know specifically how would you actually translate that in a story, as I said, an actual business metric. What's important for business? It's not always like quite clear. When you're new. And I saw you've done a lot of mentoring, actually, and mentoring for people who are interested in cybersecurity, especially within the financial services sector. I think you have a company that's called CyberShield.
Yep.
All right. So what is for you, the main reason, the main interest, passion, like to actually get started and help other people?
Yeah, definitely. So, the reason I started Cyber Shield, was because I wanted to kind of help play my part in kind of reducing the cyber skills shortage. And I'll kind of rephrase that. I don't really think it's a cyber skills shortage because I think these skills can be taught to anyone. I think there's a recruiting problem in cybersecurity and how we kind of recruit talent. And so I've kind of like reverse engineered what I've sort of seen out there in terms of job listings, entry level cybersecurity positions, and really just done my homework in really figuring out like how can someone get into cybersecurity and be able to be someone that contributes to an organization at an entry level position? Because I see that people are really, really hungry to get into this industry, but there isn't well, at least there wasn't when I was sort of coming up into cybersecurity. There wasn't like a formal career path or sort of track that someone would follow. I know when I went to university, our undergraduate didn't have a cybersecurity program. I believe they have one today, and that's slowly becoming the new norm.
Not everywhere, but
Yeah, not everywhere. So some places are starting to get them. Some places are, sort of exploring that capability and option in a formal education. But some people don't like formal education, and so my big reason behind sort of starting Cyber Shield is just to kind of help people build a community of people who are enthusiastic about cybersecurity and are sort of looking to get some sort of mentoring, training, and just kind of be around people who know cybersecurity and use it as an opportunity to just share knowledge and help the next generation.
And what advice would you give to someone who is looking, let's say, for entry-level job? What should they learn? How should they educate? And what topics specifically should they educate themselves?
Yeah, definitely. I think my biggest advice is to stay hungry. Cybersecurity is so broad. You would have asked me, 10 years ago, would I know that I enjoyed DevSecOps or cloud security so much? I had no idea what that was when I first started cybersecurity. So I'd always say, just stay hungry. You're never gonna know everything. But just stay hungry and always explore. I think in terms of, getting your feet off the ground, in terms of learning about cybersecurity, I would say, go to your library, and check out the first cybersecurity book that they had. It could be an intro to cybersecurity, fundamentals on cybersecurity. Just understand what general cybersecurity is, because a lot of people think that cybersecurity is just about the hackers who wear the hoodies and they sit and type keyboard commands all day in the terminal prompts. There's so much more to cybersecurity than just that. And so really understanding, what is the broad scope of cybersecurity is at a fundamental level, I think would set you apart.
And what do you love about like cloud security and DevSecOps now, like 10 years after?
Yeah, it's super fascinating because when I first started my career, I worked in a data center. So I was in an on-premise data center. I was installing servers, configuring routers and switches, deploying firewalls, doing everything, configuring, VMware. And I think one of the sort of senior consultants at the time, he was like, "Hey, Michael, you know that one day all of this is just gonna be code, right?" And I was like, "Wait, what do you mean by that?" And he was like, "Yeah, like soon we'll just be deploying this stuff in code." And he kind of said that to me, and it kind of clicked, and I was like, "I see. Like eventually this is going to all be software defined." And that's kind of where like that really piqued my interest in like, what is the cloud actually? Like how does the cloud work? And yeah, from there, I really got hands dirty into vulnerability management, and that turned into really just me being a flushed out cybersecurity professional, focusing on cloud and application security stack. So yeah, I think just having that beginning, working in the real physical aspect of a data center and understanding server infrastructure, routing infrastructure, networking, kind of helped me have a better understanding of how like it would work in the cloud. Everything's kind of programmatically done.
Yeah, it's all starts with like a small sparkle and understanding kind of what's the future, I would say, and just going into it, and here you are on the podcast sharing your tips now
Yeah.
to probably some of the younger generations actually who want to learn more about the topic. And I always ask one last question on the podcast, but because you already said like you can look at some intro to cybersecurity books, etc. But what book would you is actually one of your favorites, and would you really recommend to someone to read about security?
To read about security. So I'd probably recommend I think it's the Cloud Asset Matrix by Sunil Yu. He's the founder of Jupiter One, and I apologize if I butchered his name. But it's the cloud. One second, I'm actually gonna grab it for you because I have it.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
So it's this book, Cyber Defense Matrix.
Okay.
This is a really good book because at the beginning of the podcast, I mentioned having a good understanding of visibility into your assets, and assets being everything from identities to resources. And this book really does a good job sort of explaining that at a technical and a business level. And just a quick plug, I would actually recommend all three of these books in this collection. So
Oh
there's
wow. Okay.
Reinventing Cybersecurity as well. Really just
Okay.
talks about cybersecurity in the modern day. Obviously, a lot of cybersecurity stemmed from military research and stuff that was kind of conducted in the military. And so it kind of talks about like what's the next phase of cybersecurity and being more technologically driven. And then another one that talks about modern cybersecurity, and this is kind of just some stories from leaders in the industry, and they talk about how they overcome some of their big hurdles and initiatives.
Okay.
So yeah, I would
Interesting.
recommend all three of these.
Yeah, I will take a look also myself. I think modern cybersecurity would
Definitely.
actually be super interested to read. Because I just want to learn more about the market, I think, especially to just understand also all the dynamics, which is very interesting to see how everything kind of how the dots are connected in the ecosystem.
Yep.
Well, Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing and for coming on the podcast. It was really great chatting with you, and I'm sure the listeners learned a lot, and I can't wait to share this episode.
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, thank you very much. Can't wait to hear it.